I love that fight scene. Like,
So great.
It's great. I mean, the word obscene means off stage.
Right.
Because in Greek tragedy, like, you don't have the stuff to do compelling stage violence. Like, that just wasn't part of the theater craft. But very often when bad things happen, when fights or violence happen, it has to happen off stage. And this moment of the fight, I was like, oh, just this wonderful moment of like Greek tragedy where things are happening off of the camera. And it's so much more powerful that way.
Hey, Dukes here, and before we get into our discussion of Tampopo, the film by Juzo Itami, I wanted to mention a podcast you might enjoy. If you've ever wondered what it's like to summit Mount Everest, or win an Olympic medal, or even to be put in prison for a murder you didn't commit, which would be much worse than those other two things, there's a podcast that explores all of those things and a lot more. It's called What It's Like To, with host Elizabeth Pearson Garr. On What It's Like To, you'll get interesting conversations with inspiring people and come away with a lot of ideas you can apply to your own life. I particularly enjoyed the episode called What It's Like to Sail Solo Across the Atlantic Ocean with Cal Currier, who was 16 when he did that single-handed sailing trip. And it's totally fascinating. Another one I liked featured working Hollywood actor Barrett Swatek, and she tells stories about shady, exploitative talent agencies, sort of how she broke into the industry, and a pretty hilarious story about sneaking onto a Hollywood lot in order to kind of scout it out. What It's Like To is available in all the places you get podcasts, so search for What It's Like To ... or ellipsis to those in the know. All right, on to our discussion of Tampopo. I have an opening story I wanted to tell you. I was inspired by.
I see it's something about Christopher's cakes.
It is about Christopher's cakes.
Listeners, that's with 3 Ks.
Indeed. 3? 2.
Well, Christopher.
1 K.
Cake.
Oh, yeah, you're right. 3 Ks.
K-E.
Yes.
3 Ks. This is not a racist joke, I hope.
No, I hope not. I certainly hope not. Not on my part. You and I were texting earlier this week, and I feel like there was a little bit of sense that we have a small and loyal audience, which we're very grateful for. But I think both of us were sort of like maybe a little bit disappointed that our growth seems to have flattened out a little bit this fall. And like these things come up and they come down, and it's sort of hard to say, but I think we both were expressing a little bit of that, and we had some back and forth. And then on Saturday, inspired by this movie, I decided to make tonkatsu ramen. I also had to run an errand, in fact, return Tampopo, the DVD, to my cute little local library. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to buy myself a dessert from that cake shop. And there was a cake shop that opened in my little neighborhood, McKinley Park, like 2 or 3 years ago. And it's not a like coffee shop where you would go and like do your work with a laptop with Wi-Fi. There's no paninis. There's no breakfast wraps. There's nothing with an egg. It's just cakes. And they do have an espresso machine. And so they do some but that's it. And no muffins, like no biscuits, cake.
No,
yeah.
No cupcakes.
I don't even think there are cupcakes. There are slices of cakes.
Because everybody knows that a cupcake is just a fucking muffin.
They do.
Wearing a hat.
They do sell cake tops though, which I don't know why they have cake tops for sale, but they're sort of wrapped. They're wrapped in a way very similar to if you were to purchase a whoopie pie at a main gas station, like similarly like wrapped with a little like handwritten
just
label.
A disc covered in cellophane.
Disc covered in cellophane, often with like Dottie's whoopie pies.
Right? Yeah, with like an Avery printer label.
Yeah, there you go.
Like clearly somebody put the label on the whoopie pie first. first and then wrote Dottie's Pies on it.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. So it's sort of maybe a little bit higher end than that, but not much. And there's a very specific aesthetic. All the letters in Christopher's cakes are a bright color. It's sort of like a birthday cake aesthetic, and the interior is done that way. And it's this beautiful little storefront in a kind of, working class neighborhood that is neither poor nor wealthy, neither gentrified nor neglected, sort of in the middle of all of these different things. I found it quite charming, and I take a lot of walks, and I've walked by Christopher's Cakes probably like 50, 60 times, and I've never gone in. And this time I was like, you know what? Rather than going to the grocery store and buying like a $3 cake, I'll go in there and I bought a choco flan, which was like a chocolate cake in which one of the layers was flan. When I walked up, there was a woman baking in the back, and she called out somebody else, and he came up and he was like, "Can I help you?" And I purchased, and we chatted a little bit, and I kind of wanted to say, "How's business?" because I'd never see anybody in there, but he seemed cheerful enough, and I had the sense that he was Latin, but not Mexican being the largest Latin ethnicity in Chicago, but probably Caribbean, so maybe Puerto Rican or Cuban or Dominican would be the most likely scenario. Or if he is Mexican, he's like from Veracruz or somewhere on the Caribbean. So I don't know, it was just the vibe I got from him. And I just immediately got the sense that, like, this is exactly what this guy wants to be doing with his life. And you could design a cake shop or a bakery that more people would probably come into, right? You could have a lot of tables with Wi-Fi. You could have, cheap, you could have muffins, for God's sakes. You could have morning glories and sesame, seed muffins. And you could have breakfast burritos. There are lots of things you could do. And he was not going to do that. Like, he wanted a cake shop. He does serve espresso, but there's no place to drink it. You would just stand at the counter and drink it, or take it to go.
As Italians intend.
So as I took my cake and I was riding my bike back home, I was like, this is upper middle brow. And I don't mean that as an adjective. I mean, it's like he's doing exactly what he wants to do, and he doesn't seem to mind that perhaps there is a business model that would bring more people in, right? Like, you and I could do a 20-minute weekly podcast that was like top 10 new books on, that dropped this week.
Totally.
Kind of a boring podcast. I wouldn't want to do it. I don't think I want to listen to it. I don't really care about the newest books. I sort of, we could do a different version of this that probably grew our audience faster. We could focus on a particular sector of fandom. We could do all Star Wars novels. There's all sorts of things that we could only do books. I mean, we've branched out into film now, and we're going to branch out in other ways too. And I feel like we're doing exactly what we want to do, and we want our podcast to be. And, we don't have to pay like $1,500 a month in storefront rent in McKinley Park, only something like $25 a month in various like subscriptions and things like that for posting. So it just cheered me up a little bit to see the parable of Christopher's Cakes made me recognize
I have three separate responses, as is very often the case when we're talking. First of all, I went on, so I have several Joshes. I have many Joshes in my life. I have sort of a surfeit of Joshes.
Yes.
It was one of my Josh's 50th birthday parties, 50th birthdays on Saturday, but we went for a bicycle ride the day out, as somebody referred to as, "Oh, this is sort of your Boxing Day." And I was like, what an interesting way to talk about
the day
Boxing
after
Day.
your birthday, right?
Right, yeah, exactly. I was like, does Christ think about Boxing Day as like his Boxing Day? I don't know. But I was on that particular ride, and somebody was asking me, what is bringing you joy in your life right now? And I had to think about it a little bit, but I was like, you know what? This podcast I'm doing with my best friend, Jesse Dukes, a lot of shit in my life is going completely sideways at the moment. But once a week I get on Zoom and I talk with my friend Jesse about books or movies, and it's hilarious. And so that was a real upside about our podcast. And the other was getting a text message from my mom, which said, "Your dad is lying on the couch listening to Upper Middle Brow, smiling ear to ear.
Oh, that's very cute. Did you determine which episode it was?
Yes, our most recent episode, chewing episode.
Excellent.
And then let's see. So do you know the reason why Christopher's Cakes was probably spelled with K's instead of C's?
No.
It is very often a trademark thing. So when you see like Cozy Coffee spelled with a bunch of K's, there's another Cozy Coffee that is spelled with C's. It maybe not even in existence, but somebody has in that particular, usually at the state level,
right?
Like somebody has grabbed that state level assumed business name,
right?
So that's why it's not like some weird like proliferation of people who want to be German. It is actually like a trademark and copyright thing.
Right. But also maybe he does spell his name Christopher with a K. Maybe there is the other thing is that like there were a lot of Germans in the Caribbean and Mexico too. So maybe he is German Latino and Christopher. Although is Christopher German or Swedish? I don't even really know.
It's Greek.
Oh, it's Greek with a K.
Yeah, it means bear. It means bearer of Christ.
Ah. Well, you would know that because you're sort of a Christopher yourself.
I am.
More than sort of.
I learned that from my great high school art teacher, John Hayes.
So does Topher mean bearer?
I believe so. Yeah,
right.
I believe like Toffer is some sort of
Shall we get into our prime business?
Yes, let's get into it. As usual, I only managed to get 2 out of my 3 anecdotes about your bakery in.
Let's do the third one. Sorry. The proliferation of Joshes. Which led to your saying that this podcast gives you joy, which I agree with. This is one of the most fun things happening in my life right now, and it's something I always look forward to. And even just like editing it, I will procrastinate other tasks to edit some Upper Middle Brow on Reaper for a little bit. What's the third?
My only other anecdote was what you're describing really makes me think of the Crown Bakery in Worcester, Massachusetts, which my mom always patronized for our birthday cakes. And so it sounds very similar, like lots of primary colors, just a glass front counter. This is the 1980s, so I doubt an espresso maker, but maybe a coffee maker that maybe you could order some drip coffee from. Nowhere to sit. It's my understanding that a lot of those cake places look like they're about to go out of business, but they are doing like great business on like basically
catering,
like people who order cakes from them.
And that's my hope for Christopher. And I was even thinking in the analogy that sort of just as you and I are not likely to make much money doing this thing that we love, we both have our catering. We have our equivalent of that.
Yeah, we have our right.
Dukes and Bag can always make a living. It might not always be the most exciting thing that we're doing in our lives, but usually it's something adjacent to that.
That's true. Yeah. Our livings are adjacent to very interesting things, which is great. Yeah. That's what we're doing. But yeah, let's talk about. I love that we watched it at the same time.
Yeah.
Like we both were watching it at the same time.
To each other randomly.
And it was great. It was wonderful. It was very nice to like know that psychically, I think I was like 10 to 15 minutes ahead of you, it felt like.
Yeah.
But it was really nice knowing that we were kind of wandering through. I've never seen this. Have you seen this before?
No.
But we open in a theater. This is Juzo Itami's 1986 classic Tampopo, revered. Holy crap. I had not heard of this movie. But when I brought it up with Josh on Sunday, he was like, "Oh my God, there is something with a crab and a woman's vagina." And I was like, "Yes, I think you're right."
I think it's a shrimp, and I don't know that the vagina is involved exactly, but yes.
But he was really correct in terms of like
we're in the ballpark.
Got the feeling correct.
Yeah.
We begin in a theater where we are greeted by a young gangster who is there with his girlfriend, who breaks the fourth wall right away and says to us, "I see that you're going to the movies as well." pretty much like complicating everything right off the bat.
Right.
Like,
And that first look that he gives the camera is actually a little scary too.
Yeah.
You're like, no, you're not supposed to see me. Don't look. Like, it's kind of like if you watch Twin Peaks, there's a moment in a dream where Killer Bob does the exact same thing and appears to be looking right at you, right at us.
You're right.
And
I had forgotten that moment. It is
creepy.
terrifying.
Yeah, it is creepy.
Bob
Because he's
is quite
crawling
creepy.
on the bed, actually, towards you. So it's as though you're having a nightmare, and that man is crawling on your bed towards you. Yeah.
He's a young gangster. He kind of roughs up somebody else in the theater for eating potato chips loudly.
Which-
His men
100% in
Yeah.
agreement.
He also says something about digital watch alarms going off,
Yeah,
and
very
I just
80s.
love it. Like, and also like anticipating the cellular phone era.
Sure,
It was just
sure.
awesome. So we learn right away. We're like, oh, okay, we're sort of complicit in this movie making experience, and we cut. I believe we go to the truck next.
Yeah.
We don't jump to... So we go to a truck. There are two truckers, Goro and Gun. And Gun is reading a book about ramen. And we get this cutscene to a ramen master educating a young ramen eater how to correctly eat ramen to like really experience it. And Goro is driving. Gun is reading the book. And Goro is like, oh my God, your book is making me hungry. Let's stop for ramen. And so they stop at a local ramen store. They go in and they get in a fight with some rude customers. We don't get to actually see the fight. It happens sort of wonderfully off scene, off camera. And Goro loses because he's trying to take on 5 of these rude customers who are hanging out in the ramen shop. He doesn't beat them off, but sounds like he sort of gives as well as he gets. And he ends up spending the night because he's knocked out. He doesn't spend the night romantically. The ramen owner is a woman. She has a young son who is also beat up by people his own age, by a group of bullies.
A clear echo.
Yeah, very, very. We're both in the same world. She makes them breakfast. She makes excellent pickles, but we learn that she's really not a good ramen cook. Goro and Gun get in their truck to leave. She chases them down, and she asks Goro for help becoming a better ramen cook. And I'll kick it back over to you.
We then go into a classic training montage. Goro is training Tampopo, and everything from keeping the water hot enough and ladling out the noodles. Goro's training really focuses on the mechanics, because later we're gonna train in some other dimensions. And then in the midst of this training process, we get a scene that echoes both Mike Tyson's Punch-Out and more initially Rocky, where Mickey is riding behind Rocky in a bicycle. They're jogging along a river in Tokyo. And then we get the first of a series of little interlude sketches that there are some businessmen who happen to be walking by, and the camera leaves Goro and Tampopo and follows them into this fancy French restaurant. And then there is a series of skits that ensue in the restaurant, including several of these important middle-aged or older businessmen, and then the kind of office flunky who they all are kind of abusing. They're ordering French food. One of them makes a reasonable but not very sophisticated order of sole fish and Heineken beer. But then it turns out that the young guy is very acquainted with French cuisine and makes an order that impresses the waiter, and all the businessmen are embarrassed. And whether they're embarrassed that he had the temerity to order something different than his seniors, or whether they're embarrassed because he clearly is better at ordering food, we're not sure. And then there's a sort of pan within the restaurant to a kind of Miss Manners style manners teacher teaching a bunch of young women how to eat spaghetti in the proper Western way, which means eating it very quietly and not slurping it. But then there's a Briton or perhaps American man in the restaurant. He's slurping his spaghetti, and then they all start slurping their spaghetti in a way that is both funny, but also, to me, gets to be a little bit grotesque because there's just a long slurping spaghetti scene.
It's a little reminiscent of the great like vomit scene in Stand By Me.
Yeah,
where you're just like, oh God, this is too much.
Yeah, there's too much of it, and there's a few moments I will say that I had that feeling with, especially some of the moments involving the young gangster and his girlfriend. Then we get to the scene that you alluded to. This restaurant also caters to the gangster this amazing spread, and then he and his girlfriend engage in sexual play using a lot of the food. And then, as I recall, we're kind of back to Tampopo and Goro's quest. And they go on a series of kind of ramen misadventures where they're kind of spying on other ramen shops, learning ingredients. There's one scene where she sneaks into the back of one shop and spies on a cook to learn his broth secrets. There's another scene where they almost get in a fight with some other ramen makers because
the ramen rumble
because Tampopo is kind of taunting them a little bit about their broth. And but at a certain point they decide, Goro decides he's going to call in Sensei for help, and I'll kick it back to you.
Yeah, so they go to find Sensei, who is homeless, it appears, and lives in a park with a bunch of other homeless people, who all turn out to be like fantastic gourmands.
Right.
One of them describes finding a very rare 1981 vintage a bottle where there's like a quarter left in a dumpster, and he brings it back and everybody gets a sip of this incredible, and they're like incredibly well cultured.
Yeah.
And after Goro says they're sort of taking Sensei away, they go up a set of stairs, and all of the homeless gourmands also turn out to be a great chorus.
Yeah, they sing like four-part harmony.
They sing this beautiful four-part harmony to Sensei and Goro and Tampopo. One of them takes Tampopo's son to break into a restaurant. And after learning that Tampopo's son loves rice omelets, and makes him a perfect rice omelet on the spot.
Great.
As the night watchman arrives, he goes in one door trying to catch them. They sneak out the other. It's like something from the Muppets.
Well,
amazing.
And I would say probably like Buster Keaton or Charlie Chaplin is sort of silent film caper. Mm-hmm. Also has a kind of feel of French noir from the 1960s. I mean, this movie is very eclectic in its influences, which is great.
And it really mines all sorts of like film nostalgia. I mean, it's really. I think the rice omelet section is a direct Charlie Chaplin thing, illusion. The sensei helps with Tampopo's training, and they get another benefactor in the character of a rich old man who is eating next to them at a restaurant, and perhaps orders a little too richly. He almost chokes to death. Tampopo rescues him by using a vacuum cleaner to suck the thing that he is choking on out of his mouth. Out of gratitude, he kind of agrees to help fund their endeavor. And so, I mean, what's going on here is we are getting the posse together.
Right.
This movie is it's a ramen western. It is not a spaghetti western. Goro wears a cowboy hat. He's dressed like a cowboy. He never takes the cowboy hat off. But yeah, we're getting our posse together. And right around this time, we begin... The way this movie works is we get long sections of the main plot, and then the camera sort of loses interest in the main plot or gets like interested in something else. Yeah. And we go off and we watch that.
Right.
And this next one is our gangster from the beginning is being shot to death in the rain. Apparently, shootouts almost always happen in the rain. I went and did some TV tropes lookups, and
I feel like it's also very common in like the sort of contemporaneous like John Woo Hong Kong films too. Like it's
yeah, I can see that.
We're often we suddenly go from one type of movie to another type of movie in this movie a lot.
Yeah, and our gangster gets a traditional romantic farewell
it's like
with his
Beowulf,
girlfriend.
right? Yeah.
Yes, it's just like Beowulf. It's like he's the dragon has killed him. He's wounded the dragon. He's about to be set off on
Right.
his Viking funeral. And what does he decide to talk to his girlfriend about? Wild boar.
Yeah.
And the fact that wild boar intestines are usually stuffed with yams, and if you kill the boar quickly and take the intestines out, you can have yam sausages.
I'm realizing that this is roughly 2 or 3 years prior to Sam Neill's death scene in The Hunt for Red October, where
I did think of that.
Right.
Oh my God.
which I wouldn't. It's possible because I don't think that was in the book, the Tom Clancy novel. So it is possible that filmmaker, I would have liked to have seen Montana.
And we would buy a recreational vehicle.
Would they let me buy a pickup truck?
That is by far the best scene.
Yeah. It's, I mean, these are two different scenes, but yeah, first we hear, I actually intend for us to read that book one day, because I think it's fascinating, and it's an excellent movie.
Mm-hmm.
But
it is good. Yeah, Sam Neill steals the show.
Right.
So after he dies, I'm going to kick it back to you.
Right. So, there were some other gangster skits we didn't really mention. We see the young gangster eating a oyster fresh from a young oyster diver, and some other stuff happens. But then the bully finds Goro. I think the bully's name is Ken, and the guy he got in a fight with the first night, and he's feeling regretful that his men ganged up on Goro, and he said, "I should have fought you one-on-one." So they have a rematch, another classic Western scene, but also kind of like a samurai Toshiro Mifune scene at one point, wonderfully silhouetted under a bridge. They fight to a draw, and then, of course, as men can do, now that they've established that neither of them is either greater or lesser than the other, they can then become friends. So they become friends, and the bully, Ken, decides he's going to join the gang and help Tampopo make her ramen, and he's a contractor. And so he does a stunning renovation of the shop. And then in the midst of all this, we have a series of these moments where Tampopo shows her improved recipe to everybody, and it keeps growing. At first it's just 2 of them, then it's 3 of them, now we're up to 5 men who she's serving to, and there's a certain moment where everybody is like, yeah, this is it, you've done it, you've made your ramen. I should say there's another little skit somewhere in here. I don't quite remember how it fits these other things. It may have been right after the gangster. There's 2 skits. There's the con man who's in the restaurant who there's also the thief in the grocery store, and then there's
not even a thief. She just ruins food.
Right. She just ruins food. She touches it, squeezes it, and then there's also the dying mother. That was the one of those that was the most memorable to me. This woman who is on her deathbed, and she's completely unresponsive until her husband says, "Get up and cook dinner for the kids," which she then does in a zombie-like state, serves it, and then keels over, dead. Absolutely stunning. And then the father says, "Eat the food while it's hot." It was the last thing your mother did.
This is the last meal your mother ever made.
Yeah.
Eat.
So these are, all these other skits that are food adjacent are kind of happening. And then Tampopo opens, and I'll kick it back to you.
Tampopo opens, and it is successful. And we're learning along the way that Goro is kind of in love with Tampopo. And a lot of his friends kind of make fun of him for how much he's like clearly in love with her, and he denies it, and he's like, that's not true. But we kind of get it. There's this moment where she kind of dresses up, and puts on her chef's hat, And it's this very sort of glowing senior pictures moment. And we get the sense that, yeah, Goro is pretty smitten. But since this is a Western,
he rides off.
He rides off. You don't get your culminations in a Western, or at least you don't get, if there is a romantic attachment, it doesn't continue. That's just not the way that these things work. And Tampopo's son has now made friends with the three bullies, again in a parallel of Goro and Ken's experience. And I think that's it.
Yeah.
Unless I'm forgetting something crucial.
Well, and you dropped for a second, but there is the credits roll over a very long shot of a baby suckling at his mother's breast, which is, and the camera very slowly tracks in throughout that shot. So it's a pretty stunning shot. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, those moments that you mentioned when they are tasting, when they're sort of doing trial runs of Tampopo's ramen, are my favorite moments in it. Like, as a piece of visual storytelling, there's no dialogue in it. Yeah. They're just eating. Yeah. The camera doesn't change. No, there aren't any cuts. And the first time you get to watch that, you get to watch it unfold that the ramen isn't really hitting yet.
Yeah.
And there's sort of this initial enthusiasm and then a real slowing down of the eating. And then the choreography of it is just stunning. Right. And then the second one where it really works is equally stunning and equally silent, and you can really see the influence of like silent movies on this. And
there's so much subtext in this film, and there's so much visual storytelling in this film. I mean, there's a lot of dialogue too, but so much of the story is conveyed through things like the camera angle, the editing, and also just what the characters do visually on camera.
Yeah. My first question is about framing devices, because we have a series of framing devices that we begin with. So our first framing device is we are at the movies and we are watching a movie of a character in a movie theater telling us that we are watching a movie. From there, we shift to the truck, and in it, Gunn is reading a book, and we get our very first like sketch that is in the book, and then that book influences the action of the whole rest of the movie. What's going on with these like framing devices? Like, are we a film inside a film inside a book, a film inside a book inside a film? Who is the you the gangster is addressing? Is it us? Is it somebody else? And I'm not looking for specific answers to this, but what did it do for you? What was your experience of realizing that there was pretty quickly that there were several framing devices being used here?
Yeah, well, first of all, I don't know that I would call them framing devices, because I don't really think it's a story in a story, like in the sense of a Midsummer's Night's Dream or The Princess
Bride. Like Heart of Darkness, right. Or, yeah.
So that said, I mean, I could see why you would call them that, and especially, honestly, that first scene where the young gangster shows up, I had this moment of like, is this just how like every Japanese movie started in 1986? Which would be amazing, right? Like that's their version of like, let's all go to the lobby, like, or, Nicole Kidman.
Oh my God, you thought it was
around. Yeah, like just a pre-reel.
Please silence your phones.
Yeah, that's just the like, don't eat and silence your phones. Like, rather than it being, a bunch of like animated. I wish the listeners could see you. I'm going to pull this video. Oh, I'm not recording. God damn it.
God damn it. We'll have to recreate
it. Chris Mag just mimed the like walking popcorn tub for
I was aiming for the soda.
Sorry.
I was aiming for the soda.
It was the soda, fine. Like I was going broad. I wasn't being very specific about my analogy. I thought, and now we have Nicole Kidman at AMC theaters who like comes out and is like, I'm Nicole Kidman. You should go to the movies. And I just thought thought it was that, or I thought maybe it was that. I wasn't sure. So it was actually very not surprising, but telling when the young gangster opened that door very mysteriously, and I immediately recognized him. He has a very striking face. So I don't know what it's doing. I can tell you the effect it had on me.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking for.
And I think the effect it had on me, it was to put me on notice that the stories in this film were not the most important thing about the film. That they might be important, but that there is something going on bigger than the individual stories, including the skits and the main narrative. So rather than seeing these as framing devices, I saw them as assemblage devices. It's a series of stories, and they are sort of welded together in interesting ways. And the young gangster is one of the welders, in fact, or he is the welding material. So we see him at the beginning. And yeah, you could argue it's a movie within a movie because he's apparently coming to watch the same movie that we're coming to see. I think he's talking to us. But I think what he's telling us is pay attention. There's more going on here than you might realize at first, or you might otherwise realize. And I think the same thing with the story at the beginning, what those things are doing, and even the young gangster, what he has this, amazing sort of snack, kind of like Roman snack with wine like laid out in front of him in order to watch the movie. We're definitely getting the sense that this is going to be about food. It's going to be obsessively about food. And I think that is the effect. And then I think what actually then ends up happening is that later, when we first cut away from the Tampopo and Goro thread in that moment where the businessman, that's less unsettling than it would be otherwise, because we've kind of been primed for it. And we've kind of been primed for the idea of an assemblage. This is going to be an assemblage of skits. And so I think it allows us to kind of go with that moment and not worry about whether we're going to get to spend more time with our friends Goro and Tampopo later. And I think it opens, at least what it did is it opened my brain to, well, why would a director put these different things together unless they're meant to be commenting on each other in some way? And from that, I'm able to conclude pretty quickly, I would say, certainly by the time we get to the gangster's, tryst with the mistress, that this is a movie about different kinds of relationships that people have with food. And so I think that's the effect of those devices. What they're trying to do in terms of the reality they create, I wouldn't necessarily care to speculate so much.
Yeah, I don't think that part's important. Well, because, it couldn't be nesting because the gangster then appears inside the narrative.
Right.
Like, as if he has moved from the movie theater into the movie in a way that really feels like correct for this particular movie.
Yeah, and I think that the other characters are bound by the laws of physics, and he's not. I think that he is a kind of magical character. That whenever he is on screen, we're experiencing a kind of fantasy. We're seeing him, but we're sort of seeing him through his own fantastic eyes, including at the beginning too. Sort of a trickster, not altogether good, not altogether bad, certainly hedonistic, and I think kind of helping us like a trickster figure. Maybe we don't entirely approve of him, but he has some useful knowledge to impart.
Yeah, he's like the god of romance.
Interesting.
That wonderful line as he's about to die, he just goes, "My final movie is beginning."
Right.
As he gets to watch his life flash before his eyes. And yeah, I love that answer. I think that's a really helpful answer.
Any other thoughts about the relationship between, we would say, the main stem of the narrative is Tampopo's quest? It's a very classic story. And you could imagine this film that just being that, and it would probably be a pretty fun movie. It would be a kind of quirky, it would feel a little bit old fashioned, especially with all the Mahler and Liszt, and some of the cinematic techniques, but it would be a charmingly old fashioned sort of film. Anything else about the relationship between that thread and the other sketches or the other threads that you noticed?
I think my favorite thing is the way that it's the camera is interested in everything. And because a lot of the time, the way that we move into these threads is that we're in the main shot, and then these other characters kind of enter the shot, and the camera is like, oh, what's happening over there?
Yeah.
Like when we get a chance to see the businessman and his dying wife, I think it's right after Goro and Ken have their second fight. And we pan from them underneath the bridge to this businessman running through the streets.
That's right.
And that's very often how the threads come up.
Yeah.
And then
Even
usually
when
what
the gangster
happens
is shot, we hear the gunshots in the ramen shop, and then there's a cut. Yeah. You know,
then there's a cut. It always, the way that it enters is something pulls the camera's attention away.
Yeah.
And then when we return to the main thread, it's very often a smash cut.
Yeah.
Like we just come back to the main thread. And I just really, it's not like, to say that the camera has ADHD is like not fair or to anybody, either the camera or neurodivergent people. But I really love the lack of like attention to classical storytelling structure. Like that there's kind of this like, well, let's go and look at this.
Yeah.
It feels like it feels like Ovid's Metamorphosis or something like that, where there is less attention to like a very clear narrative, and Metamorphosis is just about people changing. That's it. Like these like strange fables of transformation that just happen kind of one after another, and it's wonderful. And I think you're right. This movie would work without those. It's like a dodgeball or any sports movie like ever made.
Yeah. Bad News Bears.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, exactly. I think that the real joy and the strength of the movie are the digressions.
We just arrived at something kind of interesting here too, because like what you then realize for any genre is that once you master a genre, you have a couple options, and one is to keep doing it in a way that will likely become boring unless you can just completely perfect it. Like, say, Shane, which is one of my favorite Westerns, was like, it was like thousands of other Westerns that had come before, but it was like the best version of that there had ever been. And this movie reminds me a lot of Shane. It's the classic, a stranger comes to help and then leaves. So it has... But the other thing you could then do once you've mastered a genre is play with it or subvert it in different ways. And it's has anyone, I guess, there was a Ben Affleck movie recently that kind of sort of did this, but then didn't. But has anyone played with the underdog sports movie like that? I feel like there's a wonderful opportunity to make a movie that's like a meta underdog sports movie. And, this one doesn't subvert it by making Tampopo like give up and lose and die. I mean, we still get our happy ending. And I feel like this movie has this really comforting sort of central core to it that then allows us to explore things that I think are quite a bit more disturbing or ambivalent, and there's something really fascinating about that structure that I think is really useful, and it's a good path to greatness that I'd never really thought about before.
What are some of the sections about, you said that there's some sections of this that you find disturbing or ambivalent.
Yeah.
Like what, tell me about those. Like what jumps out at you as like, as unsettling aspects of this film?
Let me give you two, if that's all right. So
of course.
I think, well, if we could take the spaghetti and the fancy restaurant scenes as one, I think both of those I found a little bit unsettling. And I think they're dealing with an unsettling topic, which was a big deal in Japan at that time, which was Japan's modernization and growth and westernization. And in both cases, you essentially have people who, through reasons of social hierarchy and social climbing, are trying to emulate some kind of behavior. And that is awkward and it's uncomfortable. And in the case of the businessmen, I don't know entirely what to make of it, but we understand that they are tremendously embarrassed by their sort of junior partners fluency with the French menu. And really, they shouldn't be, right? Because food is for us to all enjoy. It's not a contest. And then, there is something grotesque, sort of like the parable of Lardass from Stand By Me, about the spaghetti slurping. But in both cases, it's being played for comedy, but you have this sense of tragic aspiration in both of those little skits that I find both to use one of your words, embiggening or edifying, but also kind of painful to watch.
Yeah.
But then the big one for me, where I have the most ambivalence, is the gangster. And I think because he engages, essentially, if this is a movie about people's relationships to food, he is literally the fetishizer. He fetishizes food. He's a hedonist, and so he uses food to accompany sexual play, and also he merges sort of the aesthetic of the pleasure of the taste with also the aesthetic of the suffering and death. So, when he's doing the thing with the shrimp, he's kind of torturing the shrimp, I think what he does is immerse them in port wine and then puts them on his partner's belly. There's a moment with the oyster where he gets cut and then he kisses a probably underage girl who licks the blood off his face, but I also think he's taking delight and pleasure in the oyster's, nearly dead state, but not entirely dead state. And it engages a kind of, I'm not sure I'm going to use the word socially conservative, but a kind of moral, it is a kind of social conservatism, but it's not in line with America's conservative movement, social conservatism.
Right, totally. Yeah.
But I have an ethic that I've developed over the years that justifies meat eating. And, it was best articulated to me by the man who ran the farm at the place we used to work, Mark, who was a kind of a gruff, middle-aged man, a little bit intimidating to the campers at this summer camp. But one time I saw him intervene when a bunch of young boys were imitating the sounds made by the sheep, kind of bawling at the sheep. And he ran over to them and kind of gently, but also firmly said, guys, everybody in this farm has a role and they have a job to do. And it's the job of these sheep to die so that we can have food and sustenance. And we need to respect that. And I think that is a clear articulation of my morality around playing with food. And I don't like the Nathan's hot dog eating contest. What people want to do in the bedroom is their own business, and I'm not going to be judgy about it, but I don't find it pleasurable or enjoyable to see people treating food, particularly animal-based food, as a source of erotic play, and particularly if it involves kind of the suffering of the shrimp. But even the passing the egg back and forth of the mouth, I found that grotesque.
It's unsettling for sure.
I found it very unsettling. It was beautiful, the vividness of the colors, all of that. And I think that even though I find the gangster character to be kind of charming, to me, he does sit in a similar space. You called him a god of love, but to me, he is more like Loki or Coyote or Anansi. I wouldn't trust him, but I might find him charming. I found those moments unsettling, and I was more grossed out by them than anything else, even though I could see viewing the film and finding them sort of titillating, too. And actually, I wanted to ask you this question, sort of, what do you think the tone is towards the gangster and towards his erotic experimentation?
I mean, the gangster owns the more unsettling parts of the movie. You're surprised at the direct address. Anytime you're direct addressed in a movie, there's a moment of wait, me?
Yeah.
Oh shit, okay.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be complicit. I just wanted to watch a movie. And that's what you get with breaking the fourth wall. That's an important aspect of that. The tone as regarding the mood of this film is overwhelmingly upbeat, but the tone of voice that goes along with it is cautionary. The dying wife who is sort of roused to cook her last meal by her husband being like, I know what will rouse you to action.
Yeah.
Make us dinner.
Very clear social observation and critique, I think.
And
I mean, literally, she appears to be dying of fatigue, as though she is,
totally.
as though she is just exhausted from cooking thousands of meals for this family, you know.
Yeah, if consumption were not tuberculosis, if consumption were just like lacking the final will to go on, she has been sort of consumed by like drudgery. The role that society, drudgery has like put upon her. You know, the gangster is different. Like, you watch the food and sex scenes, at least I did, and it sounds like you are too. They're not erotic. Like, you don't watch them and think, oh, I want to do that. Like, maybe towards the beginning, there's a little like, oh, that looks like fun. And then it quickly goes like way too far. Like, crawfish in port wine trapped in a bowl, writhing against your lover's stomach while she laughs uproariously. He's really like pushing our buttons at this particular moment. I think the tone of voice around the gangster is kind of like, this is what happens when things are taken too far. I think that he's a cautionary tale, and you're right. Like, they're like a trickster god usually does end up in cautionary tales. You know, trickster gods are very often getting in over their heads.
Yeah.
And Brer Rabbit and things like that, getting, you know, stuck in the thorn break. And they really are the most unsettling moments of the movie. So I think the tone of voice towards the gangster is cautionary, but in a way that you would be like, hey, you know, like, that guy, he's funny, but like, I don't think you should hang out with him all the time. Like, sure, he's good for a laugh, but don't fall in with that. Like, fall in with Tampopo or Goro.
Yeah.
Like, those are our sort of moral centers of the film. And I think a lot of this movie is social critique. And apparently Juzo Itami, it said that he died of a suicide, but there's some rumors that the Yakuza forced him to leap from a building because he had a movie coming out that was very, very critical of a local Yakuza group.
They definitely attacked him with knives, and he had to recuperate in the hospital after one of his films about the Yakuza, which was shortly after this one too. And so the fact that he's a gangster, I think, is telling. It's interesting. It's a similar tone to Babette's Feast, or it's a similar message, right? It is eclectic. Yeah. It is an eclectic assemblage of different attitudes to have towards food. And I think, you know, if you take my quote unquote sort of Wendell Berry conservatism around hedonism in food, the sort of pleasure seeking that Tampopo and Goro and the gang they assemble are engaged in, to me, that does honor the sacrifice, you know, of the pork. And even the kind of solemnity when they gather around the turtle and the turtle is quickly dispatched. There's something a little bit like, oh, we're going to watch it get killed, but it happens very quickly, hopefully painlessly. And there's something solemn about that moment too that I sort of feel is appropriate. I do feel like that central thread and those characters have and are experiencing and exploring the greatest relationship of the food, you know, towards food in Itami's framing, which is the pleasurable quest for perfection. You know, that they are both seeking the perfect ramen, but they are also, the pursuit of the perfect ramen is in itself a reason for live. And that, you know, the homeless men, I was reading a little bit about homeless men in Japan during this time, which is, it's different than in the United States. And there's a lot of shame associated, but there also wasn't really much effort by anybody to do anything about it because it was seen more of as a choice. And so the way in which they also, you know, they're like the sensei's chorus, literally the sensei's chorus, and they surround him, and they're almost like demigod avatars of this this endless quest for perfection, which Itami is saying, you don't have to be a rich businessman, you don't have to be a social climber, you don't have to be a con man. Anybody can actually participate in this particular quest. You can be a homeless guy rooting through the dumpster, and if you know what you're looking for and you have the right joy, you can have a better culinary experience than some millionaire businessman ordering Heineken. And that's really neat. That scene also to me is a real cast back and a real quote from Cannery Row. And actually the fact that Goro and Gunn are truckers, that really reminds me of the trucker scene in the film version of The Grapes of Wrath, too. So I see a lot of Steinbeck in this as well. Sensei and his assemblage really reminds me of Doc Ricketts and the boys from Cannery Row. And, in the sense that the way Steinbeck tells that story, you have the sense that actually hanging out with Doc and the boys for a Saturday night party would be the best place you could ever be, in 1920s Monterey. You wouldn't want to be with those fancy suits up in Carmel, in their golf courses and their martinis and their suits.
Yeah, I think there's a reason I keep coming back to the Muppets with this movie. Like the Muppets are the brilliance of the Muppets is that when they came out, they were nostalgic for a time that was already long gone. Yeah. Like the vaudeville, variety shows of the, 30s and 40s. And your Doc is Doc Ricketts. The homeless chorus reminds me so much of Dr. Teeth and the Electric Company.
Yeah, they have the look of Dr. Teeth, right? Yeah. That's, it's funny. One of the guy who smuggles them into the restaurant to make the rice omelet really reminds me of my friend Zeke, who I don't think you may have met him once in New York when I was visiting you in New York, but he kind of dresses like that even though he's not homeless, and he walks around with a slide guitar, and they have that similar grin, like, let's get up to some mischief, let's go break into a restaurant and make the perfect omelet. They are sort of like happy imps. They have some kind of mythological antecedent that I'm not thinking of. One other thing that you just said about the curious camera, one of the things that it makes me wonder, one of the huge influences on this film that I see is John Ford. The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, The Searchers, Fort Apache, Grapes of Wrath. And one of the things John Ford is always doing is playing with the frames created by architectural spaces, like homes. And so in that moment, even when Goro is fighting the toughs in the rain, and Tampopo and the kids stand there. They're framed in the doorway. They're in the safe domestic space. The wild, rugged, rough space in the rain is happening out there. That was a very John Ford-like quote. And to keep the camera on them was a very John Ford-like move, as opposed to watching the actual fight play out. And I think some of those scenes you talk about where the five men are eating the sushi and solemnly drinking the broth, the setup is also... I'd be curious to see if the camera is locked more, like if it's tripoded more during the Tampopo main thread narrative, and whether it is more loose and curious during the skits. Like if I were going to watch this again, that's a visual experiment I would do. I know that during the restaurant scene, the camera is very curious. The men come in, and it's clearly a handheld camera, and then it slowly tracks in on the junior officer. You can see him studying the French menu, and then there's a cut, and then it kind of comes back out again, and you see everybody. It's a very, very curious camera. But to do that kind of John Ford style filmmaking where you're framing everybody, you kind of need a locked camera from that, and you need people to hit their marks. You spend a lot of time framing. You spend a lot of time looking at the shot and figuring out where everyone's going to stand. And so that would just be something I'd be curious about if I was going to view this again.
How much tripod and how much dolly.
Yeah, and whether there's
getting used.
What my sense is, it's either dolly or handheld during the skits more, and more tripod during the Tampopo scene. But I could, that would be an interesting experiment to go back and watch.
I love that fight scene.
It's so great.
It's great. The word obscene means off stage, right? Because in Greek tragedy, you don't have the stuff to do compelling stage violence. That just wasn't part of the theater craft in 600 BC. But very often when bad things happen, when fights or violence happen, it has to happen off stage. So like when Oedipus pokes his eyes out, when Yocasta hangs herself, like that's all happening off stage.
Yeah.
And this moment of the fight, I was like, oh, like it's just this wonderful moment of like Greek tragedy where things are happening off of the camera. And it's so much more powerful that way.
It really reminded me of John Ford, and I'm trying to think, there might even be a John Ford scene where a fight is staged that way. There's certainly a scene in Shane where Shane and the boy, who's kind of the point of view character, Starrett, is that his name? The guy that Shane befriends, are fighting together for the first time, and they kind of fight off the cattle ranchers, and the kid's sitting there, I think, like eating ice cream or something, and every now and again one of the guys that either Shane or his dad has punched out comes kind of like staggering over to the
clattering into the frame.
Yeah, you know, exactly. And I think that's the quote. I want to go back and watch it. But of course, part of what's happening is the filmmaker is telling us the mechanics of the fight don't matter. What matters here is that Goro is a tough guy and he's willing to fight, but we're keeping the camera on why he's willing to fight. And that's Tampopo and the kid. And, you know, the reason in Westerns, I mean, sometimes it's a romantic convention or whatever, it's mysterious, but when the drifting stager drifts into town, helps and drifts away, the reason for that, often, at least in John Ford films, is the sort of man who's needed for the job is not well suited for domesticity. You know, in John Ford's framing, there's sort of two kinds of men. There's the John Wayne and there's the Jimmy Stewart, you know. And the Jimmy Stewart is going to like be the lawyer and like build the town, and then there's no place for the John Wayne once he's killed the bad guy. And what that, I think in this case, I don't necessarily think there's as much meaning. I think my sense is that Itami is not saying as much. He's merely adhering to genre. He's really just saying, yeah, this is a Western, and, you know, the drifter has to leave at the end.
He's a trucker.
He's got to go. I don't think it's laden with the same level of symbolism as it is in some of the great Westerns.
But it helps us put us in mythic space.
Right. No, I think I think that's the effect. He's telling us this is a myth.
And that's important because like so many of the sketches also function as like parables or ironic commentary. Like it's helping move us out of the realm of like mere representation.
Yeah, and part of what he's saying is the particulars here don't matter that much. We're going for big ideas, people. But we're also going to see some beautiful ramen.
I love the flip-flop where we get the second fight where we do see the fight.
Yeah.
Because the point of that second fight is equality, rather than, you know, what he's fighting for. And it's just, this movie's it's a freaking masterpiece.
It's great. It's so great. Yeah, it's so great. I mean, you know, I guess we sort of lucked into it, but I think I could go to trivia now.
Yeah, I'm very glad that I didn't go with my original trivia questions, which was about which Westerns this is a direct homage to, because it's pretty, almost every article references Shane as the originating material. So I'm glad I did not go with that one. So the largest bowl of noodle soup ever made. I'm sorry to report that it was not ramen. It was pho, the Vietnamese noodle soup.
Yeah.
But was that bowl of soup A, 500 pounds, B, a shade under 3,000 pounds, C, 6,300 pounds, or D, Ringworld sized?
Excellent.
Mr. Niven, we're sorry. We love you. We both love you.
He's alive. I think he would love this convention based on what I know of him. I think he would be quite honored. What was the third option again?
Your three real options are 500 pounds, a touch under 3,000 pounds, and then 6,300 pounds.
6,300 pounds. That's like 3 trucks. I'm trying to think of, like, you said it's a bowl of soup?
It was a bowl of soup.
Okay.
The bowl itself was also significantly large. I mean,
was the bowl counted in the weight, or was
no? The bowl was separate from the weight.
I feel like you could, in theory, create 3,000 pounds of soup in a giant cauldron. I don't think you. I mean, I suppose you could do 6,400 pounds, but the resources you would need to marshal would be enormous at that point. So I'm going to go with just under 3,000 pounds. B.
You are correct. Nice job. It was made by a Vietnamese food company called Vifon. It weighed in at 1,359 kilograms, or 2,996 pounds, 1.3 ounces. This article says that is the same weight as 187 bowling balls.
Interesting.
Which makes me want to chat with this writer.
Well, we all know that a bowling ball vary. I mean, bowling balls vary between at least like
vary
8
in size,
quite a bit. Yeah,
it's like a really weird writing choice.
It is a very strange writing choice. Yeah, I mean, I understand the gesture there, which is to relate it to something more familiar. You know, thus the like, oh, it's 3 football fields. And men are always like, oh, that makes sense. And women are like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I mean, I'm being a little bit sexist here. Lots of women know how long a football field is, et cetera, and lots of men don't. But that was a particular thing in my household growing up, was the sort of complaining about the use of football fields as a standard measurement.
Apparently, Miss Universe Vietnam was also in attendance at this feed. And it was served to 1,963 hungry spectators because 1963 was the year that this particular company was formed. It is in the Guinness Book of World Records, the largest bowl of noodle soup ever made.
I wonder what the canonical, if this is the canonical ramen film, what is the canonical pho film?
Oh, there's got to be one.
I mean, I think pho gives ramen a run for its money. I mean, you can tell that they are related cuisines, and they're both working class. And you know, roasted meat, noodles, broths are different. I actually find pho a little bit easier to make. And I usually use. I'll often use. They use a fish paste, but what I'll often do is buy a can of anchovies and then boil the anchovies into a very thick broth, and then add that broth to my sort of chicken or beef stock to kind of get that, plus the star anise and a few other aromatics. But anyway, let me give you your trivia question.
Sure.
Juzo Itami, the director of Tampopo, had a very close relationship with one of the film's actors. Was it A, Nobuko Miyamoto, who plays Tampopo, was his wife? B, Yoshikato, who plays Sensei, was his acting coach in the 1950s, or, you know, actual sensei. Or C, Manpei Ekiuchi, who plays Tabo, Tampopo's boy, was his nephew, his sister's son.
I wish there was a D, all of the above, because I think that would be awesome. I believe it's A.
Yes, she was his wife.
Cast in a bunch of his other work.
Yeah, and I think there's a few little subtle jokes that make that apparent, particularly sort of her being described as kind of like mousy and unattractive. But then later, when she does have that kind of transformation and she puts on her 80s clothes, she's actually quite dazzling, you know?
Yeah.
And it's a little bit of a joke on that actress's ability to kind of play mousy or play dazzling too, which feels like a very husband-like sort of directorial joke that, you know, he's gonna cast her as this sort of matronly widow character who's pretty but maybe seems a little past her prime, but then show that she can also dazzle too when she wants to.
Yeah, there's a real she's all that moment.
Yeah. Oh, I haven't seen she's...
What?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. But I think get the reference, right? A mousy character made over. Also, I'm trying to remember, was it Marissa Tomei in Clueless, or... there's also a moment like that in Clueless too.
That's funny. I have not seen Clueless, which blows my mind.
No.
It is definitely a movie that I should have seen, given, you know, my time of upbringing and my penchant for, you know, like like books of Jane Austen's era.
Right. Well, one day I hope we read some Jane Austen. Oh, we are. We're going to read some Jane Austen.
We are. Yeah. We both should start reading Bleak House. Like we need to. That's one that we should probably get going.
Oh, because it takes a long time.
It's a big book.
Well, good work. We both got the trivia. So, listener, next will be Ang Lee, which, by the way, what a great director.
Yeah.
Ang Lee's relatively early in his career film, Eat, Drink, Man, Woman. I believe it's widely available, so take a look for that.
Did this movie meet your expectations?
You know, I think it exceeded them in a way. I did think it was going to be more of a story and less of an assemblage. And so in a way, there was a part of me that was sort of like, oh, I thought this was going to be a great little like sort of noir story, kind of like a Bad News Bears. But then I think this is actually, it exceeded my expectations. It's a brilliant film, I think. What about you?
I almost had no expectations going into it because I learned to set aside my expectations after The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and the Lover. And I just loved this. I had such a blast. I can't wait to watch this with as many people as I can. It's a joy.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll watch it again, too. I mean, there's so much to look for. Anyway, Upper Middle Brow is a small point production. Chris Bagg and Jesse Dukes are the truck drivers, young gangsters, and senseis. Music by Ben Pajak and Jesse Dukes. Design and website by Chris Bagg. You can learn more about us at uppermiddlebrow.com.
And we have a listener survey on our website. Please fill it out. And thank you to the person who did fill it out. If you do, we will enter you in a drawing to win a storied Bluetooth speaker, perfect for listening to Upper Middlebrow. Go to uppermiddlebrow.com for the link to the survey.
And a reminder, Chris and I are both writers and editors, and we can help you with your writing, podcasting, or editing project. You can see some of our portfolios and learn more at our respective websites, chrisbag.com and jessedukes.com. Check them out and get in touch if you want to talk about how we can help you with your project, big or small or medium. See everybody. Go enjoy some ramen.
Yep, go have some tonkatsu.
Go have some tonkatsu. Try to make your own. It's hard. It's not easy. Give yourself 24 hours if you're going to try to make your own. I tried to do it in about 6 hours, which was not enough time. Although it turned out okay, but need a little more time to reduce that collagen.
Yeah, you gotta get that real depth of flavor. You need a good steam kettle. That was one of the great joys of working in like big restaurants. You'd like steam kettle like that you could like cook a person in.
Which has probably happened.
Oh my god.